Welcome to the Ethical Culture Society, Bergen County. I'm Curt Collier, I'm the leader here. So as you heard, I finally made a trip that's on my bucket list, and I went to go see the Northern Lights. Yeah, the Aurora Borealis. Yeah, it's quite the lovely spectacle. If you haven't done that, I highly recommend it. I went all the way to the top of Norway, almost to the top, a place called Tromsø. And that's where people go to see the Northern Lights, and they were there almost every evening. So it's like after a while, oh yeah, there were Northern Lights. So now they were always wonderful. Aurora Borealis, exactly that. So let's tell you a little, you are a very scientific woman, you are indeed. So I have to tell you a little bit of the story, though. The only thing that didn't work out is because I got free airfare, I'd fly quite a bit. So I used my mileage to go to Norway, which meant I went from New York, LaGuardia. They made me go out of LaGuardia, which is awful because Newark Airport's on my back door. And so from LaGuardia to Washington Dulles, from there to Amsterdam, from there to Zurich, from there to Oslo, and then I flew from Oslo to Tromsø. So, and then coming back, it was the reverse with a few more places in Europe. And I think I was in Singapore, but I wasn't sure because I was so exhausted at that point. So let's say so the first day I got on the plane from LaGuardia to Dulles and then transferred to a flight, flew to Amsterdam, and then waited there for a little bit because it was heavy fog, as it always is in Amsterdam. And then from there to Zurich, and then over to to Oslo. When I got off in Oslo, my bag was not there. So I thought, man. So I'm going to tell you, I was a little angry at that because I had packed all my winter things in that bag. Now, if you don't know anything about Oslo, it's chilly this time of year. You've heard, yes. And so I went there and it was good stuff. So I didn't have that. So I kept calling them and they said, that's fine. And then they told me the bag would probably have to come in the next day. I'm still in Oslo the next day. And then I get a call and say, an email said my bag had gone to Frankfurt. Now, why Frankfurt? I mean, that's like the Walmart of Europe, right? It's just not a very fancy place. And I thought, wow, that was a very bad decision. I was still mad at my bag for doing that. And I couldn't think about why I would want to go to Frankfurt. But I thought, okay. But yes, it was on my bag's bucket list, obviously. So on the fourth day, I took the fjord toward. It was gorgeous through Oslo, if you ever go there to go do that. And then I found out, I got another text that my bag had gone back to Amsterdam, apparently because Amsterdam, I think maybe because of the drugs, I'm not sure, but that's where my bag went. On the fifth day, I did a walking tour, saw the stone sculptured garden, the stave thing. And then while I'm out on the tour, sitting on a bus going around, I get a call from Dulles Airport and clearly an American guy saying, hey, your bag's in Washington, D.C. And I think, why did my bag decide to go home? And it's not even home because I knew the bag didn't like Washington, D.C. It complained about it. And so I'm not sure why. And I said, well, at that point, just tell it to go home and I'll have to just pick it up when I get there and I'd buy a blue shirt or something. On the sixth day, I flew to Tromsø, which was really gorgeous, went on the Orca tour. And while I was there, I heard that my bag had now flown to Oslo, Norway. And I was thinking maybe my bag had a change of heart. I wasn't really sure. Maybe it felt like it had hurt me somehow, but there it was. But that's all I heard and I knew anything about it. On the next day, New Year's Eve, I got an email that my bag was nowhere to be found. And I thought, well, that's just typical because maybe it really didn't want to be there. By the way, I had also emailed my son, who I hadn't seen in a while, and told him, Happy New Year. Probably you're not going to read this because you've been blocking me, but I hope to hear from you soon. And later that night, I got another email that the bag was nowhere near to be seen and probably was lost. I also got an email from Andy saying that he loved me. The next day, I went out on the Northern Lights tour. And while I'm on the tour bus to go see the Northern Lights up near the Finnish border, I get another call saying my bag had landed in Tromsø. And I thought, that's interesting. The bag wants to see me now. Maybe that's when it went there. But why did it do there? Because it didn't have any bag tags. I just told them I was going to be in there, and they said I'd have to pick it up. I said, well, I'm on a tour. I'm leaving the next day. Let me just pick up the bag at the airport, and I would go there. I got up the next morning on day 9, went to the airport, and sure enough, there my bag was there. And I will tell you, there was a little bit of distance. I felt a little cold. I was kind of indifferent. I didn't open the bag because I didn't want to get inside and get in deep into all that. So basically, I just said, let me just walk the bag to the gate. And so quietly, there wasn't a lot of conversation. I walked the bag to the gate, got to the thing, and I said to them, I said, this is the bag I've been looking for now for 9 days. I said, would you send this bag back to Newark, which is where I was eventually going? The woman said she would promise me to do so. I saw her put the bag tag. She gave me a special little bag. She wheeled it back to the plane. I saw the bag was kind of a reluctant. And then I flew to Oslo on the same plane. I got off at the Oslo airport and went out there, and sure enough, the bag was not there. Now, I had gate checked the bag. So I called, went down to the Oslo airport, said, where was my bag? And they said, apparently the bag never boarded the plane, even though the woman at the gate check had literally taken it down the jetway and parked it on the plane. But I figured, I understood at that point. The bag just didn't want to go with me. I wanted to go with it in its own direction. So I got on my bag and I flew to Munich, spent the night there. I checked on my bag, nowhere to be found. And I thought, okay. I then flew to London the next morning, waited there for several times, once again sent an email, no response from my bag at all. And I thought maybe it's me. Who knows? I then flew home to Newark, and thinking desperately, I went down to the United bag tag. It wasn't there. I went it over to SAS Airlines. The bag wasn't there. Swiss Airlines. No one knew where the bag was. And then I realized, So I decided to come fly back out. That was late at night. The next morning, I came in here, saw Afina and Diana working in the kitchen and cleaning up and all this good stuff and changing the kitchen. Changed it so much I couldn't find anything at all today. And I thought that's wonderful that these women had decided that they were just going to redo everything in their lives. And hats off to you that at this point. And I went upstairs to hang the one blue shirt I had had on the entire trip, opened up my closet, and there were nothing but blue shirts. And I said, the problem is me, because I was not that exciting. And that's why the luggage just felt nowhere. Wanted to see something, do something different between getting up every single morning, Diana, and then getting to work and coming in and doing all the stuff and going home. So finally, after we cleaned up this whole place and they reorganized the kitchen. We put all the stuff back into storage. I went upstairs and there was an email from Zurich. And the Zurich said, we have your bag here. What do you want to do with it? So I thought about it for a second, and I said, just tell the bag to be happy, and I miss it. Thank you.
That said, I'm going to turn to our gathering address, and I will introduce Curt Collier. Curt Collier has been a leader in ethical culture for more than 20 years and has served 6 different societies across the country in that capacity. He is a community planner and works as a consultant for the National Park Service, doing youth job programs and parks restoration all around the country, including here in New Jersey. He is currently and recently professor of ethics and the philosophy of science at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And much to our benefit, he's now leader of the Bergen Society. And I'll turn it over to you, Curt, for your address, Becoming More You, Sartre's Being a Nothingness.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Diana. That was lovely. Appreciate that. It was nice for me to sit down and then reflect on all the things I had to do. So I did everything that you said, and the monkey mind took over, and the monkey and I are quite good friends. Yeah. So thank you. That was lovely, though. knew that I was heading to Norway, and funny, I'd gone to Scandinavia. I don't like cold weather. I really don't like cold weather. So I'm always surprised at myself when I find out that usually around the holidays, I'm in someplace cold. You think I'd be going down to the beaches of, I don't know, Dominican Republic or somewhere, but I didn't. A couple of winters ago, I spent it in Copenhagen. There's a lovely place, city kind of stuff, but not in December and January. It's still kind of quite cold there. But I had gone because there's a famous cemetery right out in the city of Copenhagen where Niels Bohr is buried, Hans Christian Andersen is buried there. But I go there to see Soren Kierkegaard because you're all fans of Soren Kierkegaard, right? Yes. Some of you are going, who to what? Soren Kierkegaard, of course, is one of the original founders of the movement we now call existentialism. And so as I'm strolling around this lovely frozen cemetery in Copenhagen, covered in snow, and watching all these other people in long, dark coats traveling around there also, kind of paying homage to all these people who are buried there, I went over to Kierkegaard's grave. It was the loneliest part of the cemetery. There weren't a lot of people hanging around there, except for one other philosopher I met. So there you go. So, but I always think about that. And of course, more of his student, Kierkegaard's student, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was French, not Dutch, and excuse me, Danish. And Kierkegaard was born in 1909. He was a lot of his life was influenced by World War II. He was actually captured in World War II, and then for a short while was in prison by the Nazis, and then eventually he came out. And then because of Albert Camus, the famous writer, he and others began to write for the underground and for the resistance. And he felt so sickened by the French people who were collaborating with the Nazis. And he took a very special tell about it, that there were all these German soldiers in Paris, which is where he was living. And of course, if you know Paris, you can't find anything, and they were always lost. And they were always asking the French for directions. And the French were so obsequious, say, oh, yes, no worries, that, the Champs-Élysées is down this direction and things like that. And of course, it nauseated Sartre. One of his books is called Nausea. But it was also to him about what is going on. Now, when he was in the prisoner of war camp, he actually had access to books. So this is not the same prisoner of war camps that most Jewish people ended up in. And he read Martin Heidegger and his book called On Being in Time, which is basically about you're born. This is all of Heidegger's work. You're going to die. Just be aware of that. That's it. All the Heideggerians out there are now having a nervous breakdown because I summarized the entire book that way. But basically, that's what he said, that you're born, you're going to be dead. You might as well live. Okay. Thank you, Martin Heidegger. Really wonderful book. And so he's reading that book, but he's thinking also just about this kind of view of time. And he also knew that Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, he's reading German. So they had German philosophy books in there. And he's reading Husserl. And Husserl, Edmund Husserl, was one of the founders of what we now call phenomenology. And Husserl said, we can't figure out what we're trying to do in this world. We don't know what truth is. We have all these things because they get in our way. Do we believe these things because we really believe them, or do we believe them because our culture says you should believe it? And it's a really important question in a way. Do you believe the things you believe because they're the right things to believe? Or do you believe the things you believe merely because other people told you that you should believe these things, that they're true, that they should be important? And so Edmund Husserl said, listen, let's just kind of strip away. Let's bracket your culture. Let's bracket your gender identity. Let's bracket these things, push them aside, and just look at your own sense of consciousness, and let's figure out the world from there. Now, what many phenomenologists eventually said is, well, that's pretty much not going to work. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. But it had a big impact, once again, on Jean-Paul Sartre, who is thinking about once again, that the Germans had invaded his country, that many of the French, not all of them by any means, but several French had collaborated with the Nazis and were being obsequious to them. And this was upsetting to Sartre because he thought, is that the way we are? Is that what it means to be human, just to give up and be like this? And so one of the first books he wrote was a book called Being and Nothingness. There's the title for you. Being and Nothingness was Sartre's attempt to kind of explain existentialism as he understood it. And there are many different kinds of existentialism out there. And the book has several different chapters. He covers everything from sex. You know, he was having an open relationship with Simone de Beauvoir. Well, let's just say he told her we're having an open relationship. She was really more fascinated by him. So she was the famous French feminist writer. He also wrote about all kinds of things in his experience and in that book. But basically, he talks a lot about, by the way, Sigmund Freud. He mentions about there, Sigmund Freud had just developed this theory that we have our conscious mind, but then we have this very, very deep thing called the unconscious mind, which is filled of all these thoughts and experiences and things which are floating behind us, which are kind of shaping, right, our view of the world, right? Freud had this idea that we have our id, our wild cravings and our desires to get out there and have sex and party and drugs and rock and roll. But our culture, the superego, is saying, no, don't do that. Shame on you. That's dirty. Stop that. And somewhere between the superego and the id fighting, our sense of self develops, our ego, which is the balance between those two kinds of things. And if the superego is too much in control, we're neurotic. And if our id is too much in control, we're psychotic and all this good stuff. Anyway, Sartre's reading all these things and said, I don't believe any of that. There was us, that's it. We have our conscious mind, that's all we're going to know. And we just need to figure out what they're. So this is all in the book, Being and Nothingness, which you can read, which some people have just kind of torn apart. But he says some other things which are very, very interesting because he talks about identity. So we're going to try a little experiment here because I'm that way. I need to pick on one person in the room who doesn't mind telling something about their lives, not deep, dark, scary stuff that we're all going to wonder about you from now on, but just stuff about your identity. Who'd like to, we need one person, bold person, raise their hand. You put your entire life on, Ginger raised her hand
Thank you,
first.
Ginger.
Ginger's entire life is now going to be on display. Sucker. So, Ginger.
I can hardly wait.
There we go. Who are you? How do you describe yourself to other person? Who is Ginger Gordon?
Do I have a certain number of words?
Yes, you have more than one, obviously, yes.
Okay.
Give me the first thing. What is your identity?
Music.
Music. She is someone whose life revolves around music. Very good. I'm going to put this up here. All right.
Family.
Family. Particularly, what are you in that family?
Mother.
Mother. Interesting choice. All right. So she's also identity around family, around motherhood. All right.
Grandma.
Grandma. Put that on here as well. She's grandma. Funny, wife hasn't shown up anywhere, but we'll give That's pretty telling right there. I think right from the beginning. What else? Who else are you?
No, your family.
Your family, yes. You're ahead of Stormy, though. So go ahead.
Yeah. Part of a generous, giving, loving family, extended family, very supportive.
Loving and generosity is kind of running in that. Okay. Who else are you?
Ethical culture member.
She's an ethical, you get a star. She's an ethical culturist, right?
Octogenarian. 82.
I'll just write.
Let's keep it, the
82 years of age, right? And is there something about that? I mean, what is the identity of octogenarian?
Some things I can do, some things I can't, some things I have to learn.
Oh.
So accommodations, modifications.
Love it. Okay. Who else is your identity? Are you really defined just by your age, though? What else do you define yourself?
Hmm. The things I love. I'm defined by the things I love.
Such.
People.
She's
People that are,
attached to people. She's a people person.
yeah, right. Enlivened by the company of others.
Okay. Enlivened by the company of others. What
Mhm.
else?
Animal lover.
Animal. It's the dog near you.
Well, I said it, you know.
All right.
Interested in safe adventures.
Safe adventures. Like going to Stop and Shop.
No, well, we can ramp it up a little. I'd go see the lights. I'd go see the lights.
You
but
travel, you'll,
I'd keep my bag
you
with me no
boat.
matter what.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
Supportive of other people and their dreams and wishes for
A
themselves.
supporter. Interesting. Okay. Anything else?
Reader.
Reader. Yeah, you do book discussions before, right?
And I enjoy wordplay.
Okay. I'll just put here literate.
Also,
Did you hear his question? Elliot asked, is that a character more than an identity? Who are
when I
you?
hear that there's a word game out, I'm interested.
Okay.
I'd say it's my identity. I
Playfulness.
pick
Yeah.
up my ears. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Anything around politics? No, that's not
turn them off.
turn off. Not political. Apolitical.
No, but who can take it? I can only take so much.
I get the part about the wife being missing. Okay. Apolitical. There we go.
And I don't think apolitical really describes me.
Okay.
Not apolitical. I'm progressive. I can't make myself crazy about things going on in the world.
Right.
There's a point where I just have to, start.
She's also someone who people need to call on a Sunday morning.
Back. Yeah, so there's a limit to, I'm not going to disturb my comfort that much. I'll continue with the things I like.
Hold the mic
to do.
closer.
I will continue with the thing, friendships, whatever, that
Sure.
have to do with keeping a sane mind.
Okay. So the question that he writes in the book is that we have all of our senses of identities, right? Think of all the kinds of things that you are and the difficulties of figuring out who it is, what we are, right? Sartre basically, when he writes Being and Nothingness, says that a lot of times, of course, we spend times being. We're told that when we're born, do this, we need to do that, we have to do these things, we have to have a job, we have to have a career, we have to play roles like mother, we have to get involved in our community in certain ways, and that's the being part of the book. The problem is that Sartre said, where did we get that from? He thinks that we're just born kind of almost like a tabula rasa, not just, he's not like a lock-in, which means that we don't know some things about the world, but that we're born basically free to be anything we want to be. And he believes that because he says there's basically two kinds of things in the world, right? There are things in which someone had an idea for and then created it. Like I need a way to be able to see the paper in front of me. And so someone created glasses to allow me to do that. That's the first kind, where they're the kind of the essence, which he calls the idea, the essence he called it, precedes the object existing in the world. But he thought there are a lot of things in the world that just exist, like trees and rocks and rivers, and they don't have a reason for being there. They just are. So then he says, ask the question to the reader, where are humans? Now, if you're traditionally religious, I guess you could say, well, there was a God and the God had a mind for creating humans and created humans, and hence we are in the world. But he was an atheist and he didn't believe that. He said, actually, no, we just came into this world and we just exist. And therefore, There is no manual, there's no guidebooks, there's no role play, there's nothing to say actually how we're supposed to be. There is nothing that says what a human has to be, in his book Being in Nothingness. So therefore, when we play these roles or do these identities, we must have chosen them. Because he thinks deep down inside, even though our culture has influenced us, deep down inside, we know that we are free not to do those things. That's why he said that your choice is between being and nothingness, the idea that we are just existing in the world. So the question, though, is, which when I read the book also the first time, is the thinking about, well, okay, all right, I play all kinds of identities. I'm told as a gay man, I knew that, okay, I was supposed to play this role as a straight man, but that wasn't really true, right? Because for me, it wasn't true. And therefore, that was just a role someone handed to me that in which you're a gay person, eventually you have to say, I can't play that role. That identity is not me, and I had to let that go. Right? One of the gifts, perhaps, of being a gay person is you have to confront the reality that you're not those things, and you have to then decide that. But it's true of everything we do in our life, right? Our religion, our politics, our family relationships, the careers we've chosen. To what extent do we just choose those things, or to what extent do we kind of evolve into that? You had shake your head. I want to hear your take on this, Nadej. Let's hand her the microphone.
I would say that it's a man talking.
That's a man talking.
Yes. I mean, I think a lot of our identities, we do not choose. We were born that way. And one of them is to be female and to have children and to become mother and grandmother. And not everyone is going to embrace that role, but a lot of it is totally outside of our, control how we are going to react to our children and how we are going to feel when we have children.
Yeah,
and I would say most women, throughout history did not choose to have children. It just happened to them.
Very good. I mean, I think that's a very good thing. So the question, Nadej, is, are you aware that you didn't have to play those roles? According to Sartre, are you aware that you did not have to do those things, that you merely chose them, which he thought was okay to a certain extent? But you believe that I could have been something completely different.
We do have choice, especially in our modern, society. I think there is an element of choice, but so much of our being comes from our genes and, evolution.
Sure. Okay.
I think that's
David,
more of our identity than what we really want to give it credit for.
We are biologically driven species.
Yes.
To a certain extent. We have
the illusion of choice a lot of times.
Yep. That's what he said about sex in the whole book, is that basically we have a choice to do sex or not do sex. But every time we do sex, we give a little way of ourselves, some way of our sense of identity, because the other person loves us, and then we try to become like they want us to be. And therefore, he thought that relationships were somewhat oppressive, which is probably the reason why he and Simone de Beauvoir did not live in the same house. David, do you want to add to that? Wait, you need a microphone?
I was just going to agree with Nadej that this is really all part and parcel of the nature versus nurture controversy, something which, to my mind, ought not be a controversial proposition, although in any given case, obviously, whether nature or nurture is preponderant in determining our behavior is different for everybody. That's all I was going to say.
Okay, very good. Back there, then over here to Lisa.
Well, I mean, what you guys are talking about, I have a critique of Sartre, which is that, you were talking about essence, and that, to me, the essence of who we are is that, opposed to other species or other beings, or maybe others have that similarity, but we have the ability to choose. So I don't think our essence is how we define ourselves through our choices. I think the very ability to make those choices, even though they're moderated by the conditions, I think we choose ourselves, and that relates to conditions, and those conditions constrain us in our choices. but ultimately there's some level of transcendence of freedom, and that we manifest that more than other species because we are able to reason, like as Aristotle. So
Sure.
where that distinguishes us, and that's our essence, not what we decide to be, like the waiter or the police or whatever, but it's the remaining ability to choose, because we could always decide to choose differently. And I agree with Nadej that there are, and that's the nature nurture, but there is always that choice. And even the species that we are, that comes from the choices that our ancestors made going all the way back to rodents.
Okay.
So if you believe in evolution, then those certain beings chose certain partners, and that might have led to
Right. I mean, that was his big point, that we are condemned to be free. He thought that we should all act as free individuals and choose our sense of identity for ourselves. But he also understood that most people don't do that. He called it bad faith, to pretend to be something that you're not, or to give up yourself. He was heavily influenced also by Karl Marx, who said something very similar, that the problem with all of us is we've given all away our freedom to the totalitarian state, and that we have nothing now but this what's called institutionalized oppression. We have become the objects of the system that we're into, and we should just be aware, according to Marx and according to Sartre, of this oppressive systems we've chosen, and know that we can break free of them at any time. But can we really do that? Lisa?
So I love this discussion, by the way. Makes me want to go back and study psychology. But to Nedge's point, I agree with you partly. I think just going back to nature nurture, I agree with David that that's been an argument in my years of studying psychology, but it's really, in my mind, a combination of both. We're a combination of both those things, and genes plays a great role in that. And I think women, I mean, the whole issue of mothers, you know, I like to believe that that's a choice to not have children, even though we have the ability to have children. That too is a choice. But I think it's hard. It's harder in the culture that we live in for women to make that choice because of the pressures on that. And there's a lot of other pressures that we have. So I like to believe that we always have choice in our lives and what we are, but I'm also aware of my own personal privilege. And I think socioeconomic status plays a role. So, you know, a choice on whether we read this book or that book is an easy choice. There are much harder choices that are easier for me as a white person, you know, having privilege and some economic status. I have an easier time. So I think socioeconomic status is really, really important. I mean, people who grow up in the ghetto or in impoverished families have a much harder time to make choices. Women have tougher choices than men in a lot of areas. So I think you have to decide like what the choice is. So, but I like to believe we always have choice, and some choices are going to be much harder than others.
So you're all challenging that Sartre's idea, the concept. Basically, what he says is, you need to worry that these were all just choices that you made. Every one of these sense of identities are nothing more than choices that you made. And here, in the background of without all this stuff, is ginger. What is ginger without those things?
Curt, can we
Yes.
just take one comment online, please?
Yes,
From
please
Rich.
do, Rich. And then Elliot.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Curt. I think humanity still has so much trauma in it, individually and in the way societies are run for the most part. Some societies are better than others. We seem to be regressing here for the last half of my life, but that's another story. But many people aren't even aware of choices that they have. And many people come from, if not death-defying situations, very violent situations. So to even have the ability to think about a more rational choice is difficult for them. And I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much. Take two more in the room. We're going to move on after that. Yeah.
Okay. You have one in the room, right, Curt? I should have raised
Yes.
my hand. 'Cause
Sorry. Thank
I
you,
just want to
Joelle.
say one thing I didn't notice anybody mention is this identity of individualism versus being part of the whole. So we have this idea that each one of us is truly separate, and we do have this independence, But there is a lot of different schools of thought that say, no, you're part of the whole. You're part of the community, you're part of the earth. You're really intertwined, everything you do, every choice you make, not just the nurture, but your actual being. So that's something I just didn't notice anybody bring up necessarily.
Thank you, Joelle. Appreciate that. Yes. Back there, Elliot.
I feel that I'm a blackboard that has all these stickers stuck to them. I'm not sure how much of me is me. I would think maybe I'm half evolved, but I always seem to be thinking about what is it I really am? Now, I left home, that was a choice, and I sort of fell into situations. And one thing I know is that I really love music. But nevertheless, I still don't know who I really am.
Finding that sense of identity. We're gonna, let me move on for just a second, then I'm going to come back with a couple of things. One of the things that Sartre, by the way, he died in 1980 when I was actually getting my degree in philosophy at Texas A&M University. So needless to say, in the philosophy department, well, this is a great big thing, and they had all these things about Sartre. So we decided, actually I decided, I was president of the philosophy club, is let's put on the play No Exit, which is the play written by Jean-Paul Sartre. How many of you have seen that play? Now, for those of you who don't, it's the story opens that three people find themselves in a room, and there's an attendant who comes in every once in a while, and then finally they figured out that they're dead, and that this is like the afterlife, and they're in this room, all this kind of stuff. Now, the three people in the room, who are Garson, Estelle, and Inez, basically start sharing more, they're polite at the beginning, and then start sharing more of their story to one another. But what's interesting about the characters in his book, his play, is that each of the characters has an idea of who they are and is dependent on other people to say and affirm that. I need you to say these things, right? But they also don't admit their own character flaws. Garson never recognizes, he just rationalizes away his own cowardice. Estelle refuses to acknowledge her many life moral flaws, and Inez refuses to take responsibility for her many cruel actions. And they try to justify as they tell their story to each other, and each other people are basically withholding judgment on the other person. And the more they try to pull out more information, no, I'm a good person, I made good choices, I did the right thing, the more the other people refuse to do that in a way. And actually, there's a scene in the play when actually the attendant opens the door, which means the door to hell is open. You can leave if you finally just decide to be your own person and realize you don't need the validation from other people about who you are in your life choices. And one of them says, no, we're not leaving here till we have this discussion, and they close the door. To which one character says, hell is other people. That's the final end of the play, right? But it's also to the fact that they were tornated, if we are all these identities, that how much we depend upon others to confirm those things, rather than Sartre said, just be free to realize you have made choices. Some you can own up to, some maybe just happened to you, but at all times are you free to then break free to that? And what do you need the validation of others people anyway? Now, can you live with that interpretation of Sartre? We're going to go to Elliot, and then we'll see if there's anyone online.
I had the experience of doing LSD once, and all of those tags on the board got thrown away. And I had a wonderful experience, by the way, and sort of discovered I am just fine, just the way I am. And that was about the closest I ever got to seeing that the person called Elliot, in and of himself, was an okay person.
Right, without all those labels of precedent. We promised some other people real quick, Mark, Jim and Jerry.
So early on, you raised an interesting question, which is, do we believe what we're told to believe, or do we believe it because it's right? We're told to believe certain things all of our lives from all different directions, and yet we choose to believe whatever we believe. I think this does go back to nature versus nurture, but I have a different definition of nurture, of nature, even. There's a very fuzzy line between the two. And I think that what we are taught to believe as very, very, very young children affects us all of our lives unless something traumatic happens to intervene and change what we believe. And I really think that the whole question of nature versus nurture runs the risk of being a kind of a semantic differentiation that relies more heavily on the cleverness of the English language and the similarity between nature and nurture than on any real distinction.
Okay, Jerry? Thank you, Jim.
I think we started as a naked ape, very vulnerable. The other animals all had ability to take care of themselves, or either to make sure that their species survive. The question is, will our species survive? Are we still a naked ape? Do we have something that actually gives us a little bit of an upper hand over the other animals? I think that part of who I am has to do with where I fit in the circle of survival. Am I helpful to my fellow human beings in surviving, or am I not?
Okay, we'll take one in the back there, Mark.
Thanks. Actually, I want to go,
Sure.
if I may.
Yes.
Just to say that for me, a lot of the question around nature versus nurture, I look at the nurture side and I say, okay, sure, we're programmed, if you will, by our parents, by our siblings, by our school, by our society, by our employer, by all of these. We're all programmed, and we pick and choose some of that, although we're not necessarily as aware of what we're picking and choosing in that moment. And so a lot of times what we've chosen, we then, it comes back out, right? It's not just all programming in, it comes back out. And as it comes back out, it creates society. And some of what comes out sometimes is that same oppression that's been put in, I find myself. And so all I can try to do is be as aware of that as possible. But I'll say one of the, maybe a practice that I'm getting better at in my old age is worrying less about who I am and just saying, well, who I am is really what I do, right? I mean, what I do on a day-to-day basis, it's too confusing to try to figure out who I am. I'll just make the best choices I can. And that's a little bit, I think, what you said, Jerry, right? It's what's my contribution? How am I living in the world, and worrying less about where it comes from. So that's what I wanted to say.
And basically, one of the things he says in the play No Exit is we are often enslaved by how we believe others even perceive us. So you have come to the place in your life where you don't need that as much, although other people would say, well, that's not the freedom. That sounds like the freedom of men speaking to a certain extent that they could do that. But this also, that perceptions of how we work with other people can be, for Sartre, was a great source of suffering. He says a reminder that we should not allow other judgments to define our worth or dictate how we live. Easier said than done. And our freedom and authenticity depend on how much we free ourselves from being defined solely by others. But once again, to what extent, with all those sense of identities of who we are, do we actually have the freedom to do what he's saying in the novel? We'll take back there.
So I just want to go back to the two things, the nature, nurture, and what you were saying about needing other people to validate who we are. But I was go even further and say that even besides the validation, even to create the potential, it's like if you're a conductor of an orchestra, you need to have the other people even to perform that function. So it doesn't even have, and it's not even just a question of being validated by other people. Who we are is based upon a narrative a relationship with other beings in the world. And without that structure, we couldn't have any of these identities apart from the validation that we would get from other members. And then going back to the nature nurture, I was thinking the other day about the concept of, I don't really believe in causality in a deep sense, because the way most people, because if you think about it, a cause and an effect are just a point of view of perspective. What makes a cause is where it fits into chain. So that same cause is an effect, and any effect is a cause. So you could say the same thing about nature versus nurture. All forms of nature, most forms are going to be based upon nurture, and nurturing is going to be a relationship of what your nature, your parents' nature was. However, I think we all have an ultimate nature, which goes beyond, anything. It's an uncreated nature that exists. That's ultimate and eternal. But once you move from there, there are all these conditions that come into existence.
Thank you. One of the most challenging parables I've ever heard told by existentialists is about the story of the 5 hikers. And there are 5 hikers who decide to climb a very, very steep mountain pass on a Sunday gathering. And they decide this would be fun. Let's go way up there and get to the top of the mountain, because from the top of the mountain, we're going to have such a beautiful vista and such wonderful views. Let's do this. And so they start out on this pretty arduous trail going up this mountain on this very, very narrow kind of mountain pathy thing, walking up higher and higher to get to the top of the mountain, when suddenly bang, 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 a gigantic boulder comes down and crashes and lands on the trail right in front of them, right in front of this gigantic rock. And so the first person says, that's it, I'm going home, the trip's ruined, and turns around and walks back. The second one says, there has to be a way around. Wait a minute, let me just keep trying. And he spends the next, or she does for the next time, trying to climb over the rock or find a way to get around so that they can continue the journey. The other one sits down on the ground and says, this always happens to me. Every time I want to go on a vacation or trip, something awful happens, like I lose my bag or something. And this horrible things happen. This is what always happens to me. The other one says, wow, this is an amazing rock. The crystals in here are not like the rock around us. This must be from a strata much high before. Look at how wonderful, interesting this rock is. And the last one just sits there on the edge of the trail, looks off and says, it's such a beautiful view from this spot. Now, in this existential parable, the same thing happens to every single one of the people there, right? They all experience the exact same thing. And to a certain extent, if we think about the experiences that shaped us and the identities, the questions are the reactions that each of these people have learned? Why is it that they have different reactions? And to what extent are those things learned? Or to what extent are the things that the reactions that people have who they are? What do you think of that parable? Or maybe where are you on that trail? Lisa.
My initial thought is it's learned, but again, I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's you're born with certain, certain characteristics, temperament. You're born with a certain temperament, but then how you live in the world. A lot of how you live in the world is learned, but how you deal with it, I think, is based on your temperament, right? I mean, you have 2 people who suffer maybe trauma, and one is really tormented by that all their lives and takes a lot longer to get over it, and someone else just goes forward and just overcomes it much more quickly, right? I think that's a difference in what you're just born with. So again, I go back to it's a combination of the 2.
Same reactions, same experiences, different responses. So the question is that they're all the same humans having the same experience. Where did it come from, all these different reactions? And to what extent can you choose to be a different character on this trail? Others want to weigh in? Eric?
I'll say I was much more on the nurture side until I became a parent. And because my 2 kids are so very different. Right. And so I look and I say, well, they're both sort of, they had different experiences, obviously. But I can see like so much of who they are was who they were at a very young age. That's my experience. And so it has really moved me much more towards the nature side of things. Right.
Okay, Lucy online.
Yes, I'd say, in addition to our being one of those five hikers, everyone being a different one of the five, we could be more than one and evolve over time. So when I was younger, I was one kind of hiker, and I think now I'm a different kind. So age is a factor, and we can be more than one kind, is what I'm saying, over time.
Lovely, Lucy. Yeah, thinking of just how much our lives change as we age. Afina's next, and Nadesh.
I think some of the reactions of people depends on definitely on their genes and their hormones and the interplay of hormones with other hormones, because things like depression will make you behave a certain way. Anxiety will make you behave another way, and that's all hormonal. So
Yeah, to a certain extent, we're kind of biologically just preconditioned to respond one way or the other. But the question is, can we change that, or at least if we can become aware of it or not? To what extent can we overcome those things? And most people, I think the answer is kind of no, not so much. Here than here.
I agree that we have different identities. We have the ability to be different people to some extent. And a lot of it has to do with who's in the room with us. Who do we need to be for those people?
Very good. Who's in the room with us? Whom do we shape? Han is next, and then Diane. Trying to find room for last few comments.
Yeah, I agree that nature, genes has an enormous influence, but there is a very, very intense interplay between society, environment, and what you feel and think.
Very good. Yeah, our society does heavily put a lot of cultural baggage on top of us to make us do one thing and another thing to do. Diane.
You've mentioned awareness as a position you can cultivate to help you balance the biological world and your upbringing and particular circumstances you face. And I feel like it's a heaven sent opportunity to mention mindfulness again, because that is a tool for improving your ability to access awareness almost not automatically, but very readily, confidently. So go mindfulness.
We had hands waving, so we're going to take a few more comments.
I really find this discussion very, very stimulating. It strikes me to the heart. I was thinking about who is a real person who's purely from their born with their identity. And I think of genius composers, musicians, mathematicians. They were born with that. That's interesting because that's all biochemical stuff. I can't think offhand of other people. I don't know, maybe sport athletes were born with a certain talent. I guess I'm talking about talents. They came with it. They arrived with that talent, many of whom began indulging in that talent at an extraordinary young age.
Yeah. And to what extent there's a culture? I mean, you know that recently the United States just sank down to level 28 in the international math test. And yet Singapore, Korea, they're consistently doing really, really well. And they want to say, well, are the Singaporeans really that genetically different or good at math, or do they have a culture that is very, very math friendly in education? And they say, well, it's more of that. To what extent does even the culture allow us to nurture identities? But once again, then why do we choose to be in a culture? Why do we put up with anything that may stifle our own sense of creativity? Can we do that? I want to end with, sorry, and we'll take a final comment from that. Lots of cool things to say. when I was in high school, the first serious play I had ever been in and ever seen was A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And some of you may remember the play, some may not. Henrik Ibsen, I've always been a fan of his ever since then because his characters are very, very real and they deal with everything from how do I put up with people and how to put in a community. There's a very, very interesting play of his when there's a doctor in town who discovers that at the spa right down the street, that the water's polluted and that people who are coming all over Europe to go to the spa could be sickened by that. And the doctor happily says to the community, oh, good thing we caught this well of water that we have here is polluted and we shouldn't have to do there. And then you watch everyone else in town's reaction to that, like, we need these people, this need the tourist dollars. And there was a struggle even within his own family, and emblematic of how even we take different positions. And at the end of the play, of course, the people are storming the house and knocking on the door, trying to drag this doctor out for publishing this article or hoping to publish an article in the newspaper, forbid him. But it just, for Ibsen, was one of those things that even when you try to do the right thing, other people are going to try and stop you from doing that, even if you wanted to. But I love the story, The Doll's House. How many of you have seen the play, The Doll's House, or remember it? I'll try to remind you, Nora is married to Torvald. He's kind of oppressive person of his generation. Ibsen really wanted him to be just that kind of the society they were in the town where women were treated like children. They couldn't have access to their own kids. They couldn't own land. They couldn't control bank accounts in his day. And of course, Nora's husband gets sick and Nora secretly goes to the bank, forges his name on a bank loan, and then to take him to Italy to get him well again. And then, of course, he gets well and they come back. Well, they come to find out that her husband gets the job as kind of a big, important person at the bank, and he's going to fire several people, including the guy who Nora secretly got this banknote from. And so the guy who knows he's going to be fired comes to Nora and says, you need to tell your husband not to fire me, or I'm going to happen to mention that there was a banknote and that was you forged, etc. So she's trying to do all this stuff. In the meantime, she's trying to get her husband to respect her as a person. And all this goes on until the guy at the bank writes a letter to Torvald and says all this stuff. And he finally comes out and says, oh my God, how could you do this? You ruined my reputation and everything else. But then they find out that the bank guy felt really bad and apologized and burned the note to say that there was any evidence. And at the end, he goes to Nora and says, no, but it's okay. It's all fixed now. My little sweet darling, you child, you shouldn't have done this, but it's okay, sweetie. Just stay here at the house and take care of the kids. And she says, enough's enough. She says, I can't live like this. I can't do all the things I can't. I can't be this woman in this oppressive environment. And then he's thinking about her, and then he goes, well, if you leave the house, you'll have to leave the kids their mind and all this kind of stuff, because in those days, that's what happened. And at the final thing we hear in the play is him calling out to her, and you know what would be wonderful if, and you hear the slam of the door. That's the end of the play. Now, The Doll's House, of course, was first performed in Copenhagen to kind of mixed reviews. People were really upset that this woman would do that and she'd leave her family and all this just to be her own woman. What kind of a person is? The play eventually makes it to Germany, and the Germans absolutely refused to do the play the way it was written. So they called for a new ending, and because in that day playwrights did not have control of their own plays, they write a version of the story where at the end of this, she's about to go out, but Torvald brings the kids, and she realizes, oh, mama, she missed them, and she faints on the floor as the curtain closes. That's the German version of The Doll's House, by the way. But it's interesting about those kind of even people's reaction of how people think about the roles that we have assigned, who we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to play, to what extent can we break free, to what extent is it nature or nurture, or how do we make all these choices that happen to us, and then the realization as we get older about the choices we made, can we live with them, who is our identity or not, and we'll never know. But it is 2025, you get to start over, and I wish you a happy new year.
Thank you so much, Curt. It is always an interesting discussion that you lead, and I thank everyone here for their participation in this discussion. That's what really makes it like so wonderful, rich, and lively.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.